Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining our webinar, How Fraternities and Sororities Can Benefit from DEI Education. My name is Maria Hetz, and I want to cover a few additional items before we get started, just some housekeeping before we kick off. The first thing we want to make sure everyone knows is we do have closed captioning, and you can access the captions by visiting the website that's been put in the chat. We're providing the link in the slide in front of you, and feel free to click directly on the chat as well for that link for closed captioning. Additionally, if you're finding our slides a little difficult to see, we will be following up with the presentation for your review, and you can also click and drag the bar between the presentation and our video to make your presentation larger. Hopefully we don't inundate you with too much minute text that you can't see, and we'll also be sure to describe everything in detail. In just a few moments, I will be turning it over to our fantastic speakers. And throughout this webinar, we're going to be discussing the impact of diversity education on Zeta Tau Alpha and address your questions as they come in. So please feel free to enter them right into the chat, and we can either answer throughout our conversation or we'll be sure to save time for questions at the end. We would love for this conversation to be as interactive as possible, as we know there are lots of questions in this space, and you're going to be hard pressed to find a better crew to be able to answer those. So please feel free to take advantage. So today's speakers, as you see in front of you, I'm going to give you a quick background on each of them. And this background does not do justice to any of them, but want to make sure that you have a good understanding of who each of our speakers are. So starting in my top left, we have Kimberly Timp. Kimberly is the Senior Director of Impact for Fraternity and Sorority Initiatives at EverFi. Kimberly has worked in higher education for more than 30 years, directing nationally recognized prevention programs, and happens to also be an alum of Delta Zeta. Our next speaker, Megan Parker, is the Executive Director at Zeta Tau Alpha. Megan has served in many leadership positions with Zeta, as well as campus professionals at both private and public universities. And next on the bottom left of your screen is Haley Mangrum. Haley is Manager of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at Zeta Tau Alpha. Haley has a wealth of experience working on college campuses, leadership programs, fraternity and sorority life, and experiential learning. And finally, you'll see me in your bottom right-hand side. As I said, my name is Maria Hetz, and I am your host today. Never been a host, very exciting, and excited to facilitate this conversation. I am an account manager here at EverFi, and I also lead our fraternity and sorority program. So I work specifically with all of our fraternities and sororities. And I'm dedicated to ensuring that our fraternity and sorority partners are maximizing and scaling their prevention programming to have the largest impact on their communities. I have a background in higher education, having a master's in mental health counseling, and having worked in both higher education and technology for the duration of my career. And next, we're going to roll through our agenda. So first, we'd like to kick off just with an opportunity to talk a little bit about the DEI landscape, particularly as it relates to fraternity and sorority life. And then we're going to roll through just some specifics on EverFi and diversity, equity, and inclusion to give you a sense of how EverFi is currently working with education within diversity and inclusion on multiple spaces. And then we're going to pass it off to Zeta, who's going to walk us through their overall DEI journey, the strategies that they've implemented both with EverFi and outside, and the implementation that they've taken towards utilizing our DEI courses. Kimberly is going to give us some incredible insights that she's already been able to glean from Zeta's data. That's going to be fun to say throughout the webinar. So we'll be able to dig into some of those insights and have a conversation between Zeta and some of the insights that Kimberly is going to present. And then, of course, we're going to leave some time for questions from you. So please feel free, as we mentioned, to put your questions in the chat throughout the presentation, and we'll make sure we get to them at the end. So kicking off with our DEI landscape, DEI is not a new space for either campus communities or fraternity and sorority communities, but now is really the loudest call that we've heard. And we want to talk a little bit about where that started, where it's going, and what we really need to do in order to address it. But first, we want to talk a little bit about who you all are. Where do you currently stand? What does DEI mean to you and your organization? So we first want to break out kind of the progress and maturity curve that really helps to better understand where your organization stands in their DEI efforts. So if we move into the first piece, we have emerging. So you may be emerging in your DEI efforts right now, which means you don't necessarily have any programming. You may be thinking of it, but haven't executed on that DEI programming yet. Definitely reviewed some diversity policies, have a sense that those need to exist, but aren't reviewing them regularly, and don't yet have data to really assess member perceptions around DEI. So you're really in that first stage of evaluating how DEI fits into your overall educational and prevention goals throughout your organization. And then we have our intermediate stage. So we have some internal community dialogues. You're reviewing DEI related policies on a biennial basis. You've conducted a survey to assess member perceptions, have a sense of where they currently stand. You've done that in the last 3 to 5 years. You've hosted a DEI training, but it's not necessarily a mandatory thing that your members have to do. And we've started to think about a multi-year strategy and really incorporated diversity into your organizational values. So that's where we feel kind of that intermediate stages. And then lastly, we have progressive, that you're currently standing in a progressive stage. And what we see that meaning is you have consistent internal community dialogues, you offer speakers, resources, and trainings. You're reviewing your DEI related policies annually. We have conducted a survey to assess member perceptions around DEI within the last year, so have a good pulse on where things stand right now. Hosting mandatory DEI trainings, and have full-time employees who are dedicated to DEI, and that DEI is consistently persisted into your organizational values. So we're going to launch a poll, and we'd love to have you share where you feel your organization currently stands, whether they're in that first stage of emerging, mid-stage of intermediate, or have a really good sense of where you stand in progressive. Give everyone just a few more minutes to respond. Wonderful. Okay, fantastic. So it looks like we're pretty much a 50-50 split. So we've got about 43% of you who respond that you're currently emerging, which we absolutely understand. 45 who are in the intermediate stages, and 11 who are in progressive. That's fantastic. And I love to see how far along and how kind of insightful many of you are about the organization and where you currently stand, and taking steps towards continuing to move across that progress and maturity curve. As I mentioned, we want to talk a little bit about the overall landscape of diversity, and we want to start big and move specifically into the fraternity and sorority community. So taking steps back, over the last decade, things have been changing on campuses, and I'm sure you are all intimately aware of some of those changes. But one of the biggest changes that we've recognized are students who are coming from more diverse backgrounds, particularly when we're speaking to race and ethnicity. So what you see in front of you is a graph that has data from 2000 2010, and 2018. And this data was pulled from the National Center for Educational Statistics, and it is pulled from 18 to 24-year-olds who are in college. In 2000, we're seeing a much lower rate of Black, Latinx, Asian, Pacific Islander, American Indian, Alaska Native, and other minorities who are in much lower statistics. And those are continuing to grow pretty significantly from 2010 and then into 2018, where we're seeing a pretty significant increase in those diverse backgrounds of students who are attending campuses. So diversity has been something that's going to be continued to infuse into our campus communities and our fraternity and sorority communities, because we're seeing a significant increase in those racially diverse backgrounds who are coming to your campuses. So the need for that diversity education, that need for a bigger conversation is continuing to grow and grow with each year that increases. And now I'm going to kick it off to Kimberly to talk a little bit about what this actually means within the campus community and the importance of campus communities.
Thank you, Maria. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. And I want to spend just a few moments to, again, talk about, as Maria said, the implications for higher ed. So higher ed was facing a number of challenges before COVID, and I think we're all aware of that. And at the top of that list has been declining enrollment. And that makes the need to meet the expectations of Gen Z even more crucial. So with fewer college-age students, schools need to find a way to stand out in what is becoming an increasingly crowded market. And by extension, those challenges are very similar to those that Greek letter organizations are facing as a result, right? Makes sense. And in both cases, it makes it really appealing it makes the case for needing to appeal to this population, to Gen Z, and making that a priority. So this is some data that reveals the key to meeting those expectations of Gen Z. We recently, we have the opportunity, because we work with students K-12 as well as college and universities and national organizations. And we recently collected data from nearly 5,000 high school seniors who indicated that they are currently planning to attend college next year. And they were asked about how important issues of safety, well-being, and inclusion were in their college decision-making process. And so on the left, you see that climate and values are highly important, with well-being and inclusion at the top of that list. For sure. And we see some of the other aspects of campus life that are critical to these students. On the right, what stands out most for me are the 86% that say, it's important that colleges and universities provide students with safe and inclusive campuses, that when they're looking for a campus, and that's key, when they are looking to where to go, these are how they are informing their decisions. So over 80% of students said that these issues are as important, or if not more, than academics. So I think that it's significant enough that we need to pay attention, right? That we are recognizing more and more that these issues are interconnected and they don't exist in silos. And so they're more visible than ever. And so we need to be more visible in our efforts to acknowledge those distinctions. And that graph on the bottom right there, shows the way that we at EverFi and the way we are working on building our courses are to integrate these issues and recognize and speak to the overlaps, and as opposed to individual issues that exist in silos. So wanted to briefly touch on that, and I think we are going to turn it over to Haley now.
Thanks, Kimberly. 2020 uncovered inequity in, blatant discrimination for the world to see, for the world to feel, listen, and learn. And I think given the pandemic, it's almost as if everyone was forced into stillness and to pay attention to the same thing, right? Like, sure, individuals were tapped into their phones, their computers, their tablets, and social platforms as an outlet from quarantine, yet simultaneously, we were all discussing the same events, the same occurrences, the same happenings, just at different lenses, different capacities, and different understanding, right? I also think when we think about the year 2020, right, it'll be a historic year for many to remember. There wasn't much of an outlet for people to choose not to pay attention, to choose not to be in the know, to choose not to hear the call to action very loud and clear. Regardless of what their perspective was, everybody was tuned in because we were forced to be. While many entities have been committed to this work, I believe that the stuckness, the worry, the anxiety, the discomfort, and the potential was unveiled for not only companies and nonprofits and other agencies, but for higher education in particular, including, y'all, a microscopic lens on the fraternity and sorority industry as well. And I'm sure many of us can agree within the industry of fraternity and sorority that, last year and in recent years have been a call for urgency from our members in terms of action, in terms of policies, processes, resources, programmatic initiatives, and so on. And I'm reminded of this saying in curriculum that circulates within our industry, discussing this concept of do what you say you will do, right? In an effort to ensure actions, behaviors, and practices truly align with the values and mission of the organization. I think last year was no different in calling forth an urgency within our industry to essentially do what we say we're going to do. Now, as we transition to the next slide, I want us to think about the current landscape and demographic of just some of our fraternities and sororities. While this isn't all, this is just some, right? For context, this data includes the majority historically white fraternities and sororities, in addition to 2 sororities that are historically culturally based and multicultural, which likely accounts for some of the numbers that you see here on the screen. Additionally, for those that are like adding up stuff, members can choose all that apply when selecting how they identify. So again, for those adding the numbers on the screen, it'll reflect 109%. Okay. Now, understanding these demographics in the landscape of higher education is essential to our effectiveness in the member experience as Zeta Tau Alpha, which our executive director, Megan, will talk about later in just a second. What we know to be true, though, about fraternities and sororities in particular is the foundational principle of siblinghood, which is directly tied to how someone feels connected, empowered, or as if they belong. And it's because of this that we prioritize inclusion alongside belonging within every aspect of ZTA. There's a quote that I often hear when Jessica, I admire her so much, she's the president of the National Multicultural Greek Council, and she often speaks on this when she's discussing solidarity and unity within like this context. And it states, if you've come to help me, you are wasting your time. But if you've come because your liberation is bound up with mine, then let's work together. You see, this is part of our approach as Zeta Tau Alpha, given the landscape, right? While we understand, racial and cultural diversity has always been present, maybe not quite as visible, right? But it's been there in higher education. We realize very clearly that the experiences of our members is indicative of our priorities as an organization rooted in belonging and siblinghood. And we're bounding our success, y'all, truly, in our effectiveness to the experience of our members across all identities. We want and strive for all members to belong, right? We aren't at our goal per se until all members feel like they belong, but also knowing that, we have much work to do, right? We're humbly working collectively to advance equity in this and in belonging, but we understand that we have much work to do moving forward, which is outlined on our website within the areas of progress on our diversity, equity, and inclusion and strategic plan. But for this reason, to wrap this up, right? For this reason, diversity, equity, and inclusion for us can't be seen, viewed, or experienced as an add-on, as a co-curricular, as an option, or something additional. In order for inclusion to work for us, and I think for our industry in particular, right, it most certainly has to be woven into the fabric of existence to which the organization operates, to which the organization exists, to which the organization strives to be. This is our impetus. It's what drives us to be and stay committed to the work of ensuring that members feel and members know that they matter across all facets of their identity and lived experiences. I want to kick it to Maria for anything to add further to this data or lead us or lead us to the next slide into discussing the module that we used.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Haley. And I always feel like I need to quote Haley when she speaks, but love hearing your perspective and your insight here into the progression of kind of where we've started and where we are now. And do just want to call quickly attention to the data that in addition to all the things that Haley said, this was actually a really close split between fraternities and sororities, making our assumptions by gender identity that we do ask gender identity, and we had 47 presenting as female and 52% as male. So making the assumption based on those gender identities that we have a split pretty solidly of those demographics. So moving into the EverFi side, because we have to talk a little bit about the EverFi side and what we have. As an account manager who's consistently working with our fraternity and sorority communities, as Haley mentioned, this is something that we were continuing to see in the spotlight and that members are calling more and more loudly for. And as Kimberly was mentioning also, this is something that EverFi knows we cannot continue to provide alcohol education, sexual assault prevention education, and hazing prevention education, but not also address some of the other incredibly important prevention spaces and education that are going to be prevalent within those fraternity and sorority communities, including mental health and including diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so as I started to have those broader conversations with these communities and talking a little bit more about what were some of the biggest things that were important to them, what were going to be the priorities coming into the year, and how were they facing some of the big questions that they were being asked by members, having the availability of our diversity, equity, and inclusion course became imperative. So really, I was able to work with a handful of our partners and start to find where that strategy met our ability to offer them something that would create a foundation and really kind of give that 101 common language to their membership to begin to have better, more educated, and more substantial conversations with one another. Really what we believe in and in the foundation of why prevention education is important. Sometimes prevention education is necessary. Sometimes prevention education is seen as a nice to have. And really at EverFi, we think that there is the need to have prevention education for a myriad of reasons. So if I'm speaking to those who are more interested in the financial side, we can talk to that. And that's really where the ROI of prevention comes in. So when it comes to brand and enrollment and brand and recruitment, particularly in this space, this is going to be a place where we need to step up and we really need to identify how we are going to continue to perpetuate the brand and recruitment strategies that are necessary in this world, in this more diverse group of members, and in a membership that's calling for more education, better strategy, etc. So we really feel that today's students are socially conscious, they're activism inclined, and they're making those values-based decisions when it comes to joining a fraternity or a sorority. And so to be able to associate your brand as a brand that is more inclusive, that a brand that has more belonging, that a brand that is safer overall for them to be a part of, is a key part of continuing to win in that space of brand and recruitment. Academic success. I imagine this is incredibly valuable, that when your chapters are thriving academically, they're thriving in many other spaces also. So safer, healthier, and more inclusive campuses, and particularly safer, healthier, and more inclusive headquarters and chapters and houses and sisterhoods and brotherhoods is going to give that bigger sense of belonging that leads statistically to improved academic outcomes. Retention. This is hugely important. Continuing to see the growth of your membership, continuing to retain and engage them throughout their time is hugely important from both a financial perspective and a brand perspective. So making sure that we can really identify how we're creating that retention. Prevention strategy, it leads to higher retention rates, giving more leadership visibility, committing most strongly to that linked persistence really shows the need to continue to commit to that membership year over year. And career readiness. I know a lot of organizations that are really kind of doubling down on the way that we can professionally guide fraternities and sororities, how we can create a better sense of career readiness that the campuses aren't necessarily doing, and infuse that into the mission and drive of the organizations. And some of these non-cognitive skills that our prevention education can provide strengthen that workplace culture, increase our skills and productivity, and really do reduce the cost and the turnover that comes with not creating that environment. To dive in a little bit more specifically to our diversity, equity, and inclusion course for students, we do want to give you a breakdown of what the course itself entails. So the introduction, we really want learners to understand the benefits of living in diverse communities and explore their role in creating inclusive and diverse communities and environments as well. And this one really just addresses the experience that they're seeing on campus, how that reflects in the experience that they're having within their organization, and then helping to understand how do we make that next step, that we're not just talking about inclusion, we're talking about belonging, and what does belonging really mean, and how do we make sure we're curating that environment. Talking through identities, so learners are going to explore the concept of what is identity, what's our own identity, what of that identity is visible, what of that identity is invisible, and how does that reflect in those around us. Power, privilege, and oppression. We'll walk learners through and exploring concepts of power, privilege, and oppression that includes bias that you see in yourself and that you recognize, your unconscious bias that has been built in systemically and historically. And we're going to give them, as we always do in EverFi courses, those interactive scenarios that really teach our learners effective allyship strategies that they feel that they can put into practice in their day-to-day life in trying to make those scenarios as applicable as possible. Creating a culture of respect. How do we actually put all of this into practice? How do we actually create that experience? So learners will reflect on the benefits of a diverse and inclusive community. And this is my favorite part. They're going to build competencies that lead to inclusive communities, which is really our end goal here, in making sure that we have an understanding of how to do this, how to have that conversation, and how to take that next step. And then we'll explore how they can have, we have the opportunity for headquarters and local resources, reviewing and signing those policies for national headquarters, and completing surveys in particular that help you better assess your attitudes, beliefs, and your learning outcomes. And to dig into that just a little bit more, I did want to walk through a course map and configuration option, because we really do understand that every single organization is going to approach this in a different way. So we want to make sure that we've infused many opportunities for configuration and customization throughout. So we have a lot of opportunities for custom pages, in addition to stories that are threaded from beginning to end to really show the impact that your actions can make throughout your time, how reacting in a different way can impact those around you, and how we can create that community. So with that said, and moving over to the most important part of our webinar, I am going to kick it over to Zeta and have them talk a little bit about their journey, their strategy, and their implementation.
Thank you, Maria. Again, I'm not sure if I'm the most important speaker. I could listen to Haley speak all day long, so she'll pop in here too. But thanks for coming. I'm going to just, again, talk a little bit about Zeta's journey and how we got connected with EverFi. We were a partner with EverFi and some other educational models, and had the opportunity to work with them on this module starting in 2019. So first, talking sort of about our journey. You know, we have for years focused on belonging, and that is language that we have started to use within our own organization. Many of you others have started to do that in partnership with groups like Dyad. And we have focused belonging, and that has sort of been where inclusion, I think, sort of naturally lived, that you want belonging to be created. And we've used data and assessment to guide us throughout that, creating our program, figuring out how we can best support our members. And then I think, you know, we felt from our organization a call and a demand from our members starting in 2019 pretty early to do more, to do better, to do more, to go a bit deeper into belonging. You know, I think our organizations are unique in that we have such a wide base of membership that we're trying to serve. You know, it's 18 to 90, and we're trying to create relevant programming and be relevant for all of those constituents that we have. And I think that there's a history of, in our organizations, of wanting to sort of tote that line of not being too polarizing for our members or not getting into politics. And I certainly think we played in that space as well. And really in some conversation, you know, I made chapter visits, and so did many others, in some conversations with our chapters about this desire. We really had to shift our mindset, and it became very clear to us that it wasn't about politics and it wasn't about polarizing things, that inclusion is about celebrating your members. And once we had sort of that mind shift of celebrating our members and celebrating the many identities of our members, the conversation became much easier. So it doesn't become, do we need to post about pride or not post about pride? It is, we have members that identify this way and they want to be seen, and we need to help them be seen. And that was something that we really took that mind shift in 2019. And then I think this summer of 20 is a summer that we all sort of walked through together and truly had that call. Oh, I want to step back. I missed one of my own notes. So in 19, kind of using some of that momentum, and summer of 19 is when we created our inclusion committee. Our first iteration of the inclusion committee created an inclusion philosophy. You know, I think we all have our own mission statements and we have our values and some of those types of things. I do think the exercise, if you haven't done it yet, of creating a philosophy for inclusion is important to sort of guide you through that. And as well as kind of our strategic plan 1.0. So we did all of that in 2019, and in the summer of 2020, we had, again, a huge call out from our membership to, again, do more, do it faster, do it more intentionally. So we went through that journey with you all and created a deeper plan. So, and I think the communities we were part of, we were starting to feel, as Haley talked about, it wasn't just our memberships, it was our campuses, it was our communities, it was the world, and how can we do better? So through that, we created a much more robust DEI plan. That's the one we're operating off of now. So again, that's the one that Haley references on our website that you can work through. And I think really this philosophy of once you know better, you do better. And that's really where we are too, is in positioning ourselves in a place to learn, to not be the experts in anything. You know, when Haley and I were having conversations with Maria and Kimberly, you know, we wanted to be very clear that we still have a long way to go, but we are trying. You know, we're trying really hard to do as best as we can. I think our strategy when it comes to Zeta Tau Alpha's philosophy on this is that this could not be a checkbox for us. And, you know, one of the first things that we sort of went into was the EverFi module. And that is a very checkbox type of thing. You can literally show in your system if people did it. But, you know, for us, that was the launching point. And our approach really is that it could not be a checkbox, that we had to start to thread this into who we are, from membership all the way through alumni experience. And I think for us, that's why the module is such an important part of it, because it comes right on intake. When you're taking new members, you can make it available for alumni. It creates kind of this common language. I think for us also, it wasn't creating this DEI space that was new. It was a new space we were going to create. We wanted to thread it into spaces that were already created. We operate with 9 key values, and we have couched all of our DEI initiatives to seek understanding that we might gain true wisdom. That is language that is relevant to Zeta Tau Alphas. It's one of our 9 key values. It's a part of our creed, and it is where we have landed sort of all of our inclusion and diversity work. The other thing that we do is we've stuck with belonging as well. That is one of the 5 key areas of sisterhood or brotherhood. And that is, again, where sort of those things live for us. And that's how we think about it. It's not just DEI and it lives here. It's our value and the belonging as our 5 areas of sisterhood. I think when I was working with Maria and Kimberly on this, a lot of what they wanted me to talk about too was, or they asked questions about, how did Zeta get the buy-in to do this, or the ROI or the business model. That's where I think we're a bit lucky in that we have had a long-standing history of a commitment to education of our members. Education is a place we've always felt comfortable and felt value in putting resources behind. We really do believe it is our responsibility to continue to educate our members so that they can do more, and also share those resources with our community. So everything that we're doing, and Haley will talk about it a bit more, part of the module is we create this experience for our members, and then you have to create other opportunities for them to continue the conversation, for them to continue to learn. We have our My Sister, My Responsibility workshop series, and we created 5 modules throughout that. One of them is on power and privilege. So how can we use these things to continue the same conversation, use the same language, and use your partnerships to have that same language? And I think the other thing is we have a strong partnership with our foundation to secure whether it's funding or support throughout that. So for those of you sort of in the money space and thinking through this, I would suspect that any type of initiative you're working on with DEI directly relates to your mission. So we also have plans to submit them like grants, just like we do with a lot of our educational pieces. I think the other thing too on that space is our goals. We knew we had to start somewhere. I think it can be really overwhelming when you have a very robust strategic plan and to trying to figure it out, and the realization that you have to start somewhere. And so for us, that launch really was this module. And again, I'm going to go over implementation on the next slide. But this is where we wanted to start. And we thought that going through this, it is not our goal. And Haley does a really articulate talk on thinking through each other's lenses. It's not our goal to change everyone's opinions. We know that that is not something that we can do, but it is our goal to teach our members from the moment they join or they become an alumni officer or an advisor to work those muscles, to learn how to see things from each other's lenses, to treat each other with respect, to have common language. And that is sort of how we work through it. I think sometimes you can get questioned about wanting to change people's minds, and that just can't be your motive. I think the other thing is really, I talked in the beginning that we serve such a wide population, and you also have to be thinking about how can you bridge that gap. And for us, that was something we were intentional about with this module as well, is creating a space for our collegians. Their language is probably a little bit more common with each other, but also giving them the space that I think we also don't give the collegians enough space, that we think they all already know a lot of this stuff, and many of them don't. So meeting them where they are on the journey, and the same with the alumni. So the fact that there's 2 modules, that you have these opportunities to work with them in different spaces to sort of bridge the gap between them. We also require our alumni that work with our collegians to do the collegiate model as well, so that they have the alumni experience and the collegiate experience. Again, we could talk more about if you have questions about or anything of the plan, the rest of the plan, you can let us know. But we implemented starting in 2019. So again, our goal was to sort of bridge that gap between our collegians and alumni. We sought out partnership with EverFi to pilot this model. We started conversations with them in the fall of 19, had everything rocking and rolling and ready to go, and then launched pilots in spring of 2020. I think we all know what happened in 2020, the beginning of spring 2020. So we had a little bit of bumps, but again, we were able to pilot that, and we piloted it within our own staff too. Our inclusion committee piloted it, the IO staff, members of National Council, and then we had a handful of chapters pilot the program in 19 and 20. And then our goal was to always roll out the program in fall of 2020. The summer of 2020, I think, escalated our goals. We knew we needed to do it, and we went full on launch. So no longer were we going to pilot a little bit more, make it optional. We went full on launch. We made it available to all of our collegians, and so I'll go collegians first. We made it available to all of our collegians. We did sort of adjust as we went through that it is required for executive council positions. So all of you have your own language for that, as well as we have an inclusion chair. So our inclusion chair and our executive committee, so our officers, are required to take it, but it's encouraged for other members. So chapters sort of self-govern in that space if they want all of their chapter members to take it or not. I think that has opportunity for it to expand as well. That's, again, one of those things is you've got to start somewhere. I think, again, in that goal of creating that common language, I think will become important as when you're a new member as well. And then alumni, we originally had thought that we would just launch with our national officers and advisors. And so that is sort of, you know, what we bought. We bought the alumni package where we had intended our portion of alumni who serve like our officers that serve alumni chapters to do the alumni portion, and then our national officers who are alumni but serve collegiate chapters to do both. So we have enough of that in our alumni space for them to do both. We had all of our staff and all of our boards were one of the first groups to do both modules because, again, we're working with our alumni and our collegians all of the time. And then our national officers that work with collegians did the diversity, equity, inclusion for students course. I will say again, we were quick to know we needed to expand that because once the word got out that we had these available in the alumni space, we didn't have that issue with the collegians because anybody could do it. But once the word got out in the alumni space, we heard a call almost immediately to make it more available to alumni. So we did go ahead and up our package on that to have unlimited license for the alumni space so that we can make it available for all of our alumni. I think, again, we're still walking through sort of what that's going to look like in year 2 and how to work that. The alumni package and making that available for them in different spaces, we will work through, but that's sort of how we implemented it up to date.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much, Megan. Appreciate those thoughts. And I also wanted to note that when Megan was talking about 2 modules, there's the DEI for students module for members, and the alumni were engaged in our DEI in the modern workplace course. So they are two different courses. And so those who had to take both, they were 2 different course experiences. And we're going to talk a little bit now about the benefits that we saw from that in the insights from Zeta Tau Alpha's data. So the first point here, I think, when we think about the curriculum and where this data comes from, it's important. So to quickly walk through kind of how we set up these courses. So as you see here really quickly, the primary course content is what we call part 1, and that starts with a pre-assessment or kind of a pre-quiz to engage folks right away. And then we implement survey 1, where we collect information on behaviors and attitudes. Then we have the course content, and immediately following the course is a post-assessment to see, to show learners where they have improved, where they need some work, and kind of just give them a sense of, here's how the information was helpful for you. And then survey 2, so again, immediately following the course, what are the outcomes? How are the members, learners responding? And then after 30 to 45 days, we implement part 2, which is largely in order to collect survey data that is, again, similar to surveys 1 and 2, specifically to identify if there, where those changes occur over that 30 to 45 day period. And that helps give us a sense of the impact of whatever environment these students are in, whether they're on campus or whether they're in an organization, and how those particular environmental impacts play out in terms of the data. So let's go to that first key finding. And this one centers around the learning outcomes for the course. Our courses, again, particularly our DEI course, I hope, as everyone has heard through this conversation, that these are intended, our courses are intended to be foundational. They are the groundwork. They lay the groundwork for internal organizational or campus-based efforts. And Zeta Tau Alpha members reported some real significant improvements in several areas immediately following the course. And this, as we can see, can provide that that strong foundation for further engagement of members. Whether it be the course content is somewhat or very important to me, that it improved knowledge and skills related to DEI. Again, this is self-report. That it improved my openness to discussing DEI with others, and that it improved openness to interacting with people who are different from me. And this is just a few of the outcomes, learning outcomes that we've identified. There are quite a few in the course, and they were all really positive. So we were excited to see these results. I know that Haley was, and so Haley, I don't know if there's anything else you wanted to add about this in terms of that foundational education.
Thank you, Kimberly. I think it speaks to directly what Megan talked about earlier in the introduction of some new workshops specifically geared towards one of our key values of seeking understanding that we might gain true wisdom within our My Sister, My Responsibility package per se. And, you know, the topics include genuine conversations, microaggressions, power, and privilege, exploring your identity, defining cultural appropriation, and talking about those things before or after they're all peer-led allows us to engage deeper in these topics. And let's be real, they can be heavy, right? Which is why we recently created a video to share with members and facilitators with tips on how to lead conversations around navigating difference, around interactions with people who are different than you. And so undoubtedly our goal isn't to change people, right? But it is to provide a framework to influence and impact interactions, impact reactions and connections with others to be inclusive. So I think this speaks directly to that.
Thank you so much. The next key finding that we want to highlight here is a really important part of seeking understanding, because seeking understanding obviously includes identifying not only our strengths, but where we, where we see challenges, where we need to really focus our efforts moving forward. And this data has the potential to highlight the impact of the environment on learners. And it's interesting because as we think about again the purpose of providing this type of education, if our goal is to, take our learners or our members in this case from average to activist, that is not going to happen with the implementation of one course. And we talked about this with Haley and Megan, of course, a number of times, that it's so important to not just look at the positive outcomes, but that we need to actually really dig in a little more. So we know from behavior change theory that high intentions in a lot of these areas and level of comfort that members were reporting are only effective when the environment that they're in supports those intentions. So when we look at these changes over 30 to 45 day intercession, so that's survey 1 to survey 3, we do see declines in certain measures. And we can't say for sure, but we believe that to be an indication of the environment. And we don't know specifically if that's organizational environment or if it's the campus environment. We do know that these are really challenging times, that this is a very challenging topic for students. They are engaged in these conversations. It's really important. But in this first graph here on the left, we see that the ability to recognize a bias-related incident declines slightly. But then there's a really significant, very clear decline in willingness to intervene. But to Zeta Tau Alpha's credit, there is an increase in comfort level of reporting, and that's so it's kind of up to a certain point. Yes, I can recognize, or I think I can recognize, but maybe I don't. 30 to 45 days later, my self-assurance is waning a little bit. And I don't know if I'm comfortable intervening, but I am comfortable reporting, and I know that what those processes are that are in place. And another point at the far right is to mention that members' intentions to form friendships, which we thought was really significant in those previous learning outcomes, to form friendships with people who are different than them. But these data indicate a real decrease in that measure. And it again, as good data does, or as good researchers will do, it raises some additional questions that we need to spend some time working on, which is to to identify whether this indicates a decreased desire to form those friendships or just decreased opportunities to seek those friendships. So am I part of an organization where I have more opportunity, where I know and feel comfortable? And again, that belonging piece of, how do I reach out? And maybe I'm not so sure, but I want to do this. Now I just need the opportunity to do it. So Haley, I don't know if I covered everything that we talked about in many of our conversations, but what do you think? How does this help inform next steps for you?
As you were talking about this and as I was looking at the slide, I think about something, we discussed prior in our preparation for this, and that's shifting culture, right? Anyone who knows me, like personally, knows that I refer to myself as a culture curator, jokingly, of course, but low-key serious, right? But I believe, we have to incorporate environment and systems into our efforts of diversity, equity, and inclusion, as this is how we influence behavior, thinking, and engagement, right? For example, if I want to be healthy and eat better, and then I create a grocery list, that's nice. I can engage in conversations all day. That's cute, right? I can screenshot all the nice recipes and post about it and say I'm going to do these things. But if I come home to junk food and all the chips and the Pop-Tarts, I mean, who doesn't love a good, brown sugar cinnamon Pop-Tart? Maybe you don't, I don't know, right? But then I have an increasing change of, an increasing opportunity to retreat, right? And not truly accomplishing the goal that I've set forth for myself. So, when I think about Zeta Tau Alpha, as we strive to foster a deep feeling of sisterhood for all, our focal point is the environment to which members engage in, right? It's important for members to feel empowered to address these situations that may promote inequity and in turn create true belonging. So we have a 3-part training series for inclusion chairs that they're going through currently to help them better understand the depth of our strategic plan as it relates to diversity, equity, and inclusion, and our inclusion philosophy, their role and responsibilities in the chapter, and how to partner and collaborate with stakeholders on campus and in their local community to build upon their understanding. We're partnering with campuses, and that's essential in that's an essential engagement opportunity for us, whereas we share the My Sister, My Responsibility content with all campuses. And it's on our website, so you don't even have to be on campus to download it. You can just download it, right? And so you can tell your cousin, your auntie, whatever, right? And have these conversations because we think the environment is important to which our members engage in. And I think understanding this gap and what our members aspire to do versus what they perceive to actually do helps our team create more resources and content specifically on confidence and efficacy to empower and equip our members to not be a bystander.
Thank you. I think you've touched on, we've touched on a lot of the points that we discussed in our conversations over the weeks. We certainly don't have time, and I could listen to you speak about this all day. So I want to finish up with this last data point and turn it again over to you for some additional insights. But I think, this is also a significant part of Zeta's plan is that sense of responsibility to provide resources not only to members, but to the broader Zeta Tau Alpha community. So these are some outcomes from the DEI in the Modern Workplace course that I mentioned earlier, which Zeta offered to those folks in their organization that have direct contact with existing members. That's really important because, what stood out to us was that the outcomes in some cases were even better than those for the members. So importantly, we look at this first bar in particular that provides significant validation for why this is so important, why providing this information across the ecosystem of the organization is so significant, which is that this helped, alumni and others that took this course agreed that the course gave them better tools tools to better understand and fulfill their role in Zeta Tau Alpha. So that is really significant considering the amount of time that these folks spend together. That the course content is somewhat or very important. And if you remember, that was 85% among members, so slightly higher there with this group, and that they strongly agree that the course made them feel better equipped to engage in ally behavior, also significant in how we work between those volunteers and alumni and our members. And then agree and strongly agree that the course made me feel more open to discussing and learning about diversity and inclusion. And that's really at the heart of this, right, is that openness, because we cannot get to that activist if we're, that may not be the goal for everyone, but we want to move them along that continuum of change to try and, really help to form and understand its role, the important role that this plays in that sense of belonging and respect for one another. And so that's, again, key to foundational learning is if we're going to make headway across the board, it has to be with everyone, not just with our members. So Haley, I'll let you add your final thoughts here.
Awesome. I think I don't think I know, there's significance of advisors, staff, and volunteers completing both workshops in this work, right? And the implications it has when working with collegians through their committees, through advising, coaching, facilitating, offering resources and what have you. We want people to work together effectively, through generational differences, right? We want them to understand authentically. We want them to support one another genuinely across and through and because of the differences in their lived experiences, not regardless, but because of, right? And so we have staff that are undergoing training consistently, right, throughout the year. It's a part of our strategic plan. But quite frankly, the return on investment for this was quite simple for us. We think there's more risk for us not doing the work rather than entering the conversation, right? There's more risk for us, if we avoid the real experiences of our members, volunteers, staff, and stakeholders that are underrepresented and often marginalized than doing the work. Like, there's more risk if we choose not to engage in this work at every level of the fraternity. Thus, you see this slide right here. So a holistic approach was essential for us to take to prioritize a sense of belonging and inclusion to truly be woven into our existence and operations as Zeta Tau Alpha.
And I think it just reinforces how committed you are to supporting volunteers and advisors in the work that you are expecting them to do around this particular issue, particularly those who may not be as comfortable, who haven't had that opportunity to have these conversations. That's why I think that first piece is just really, really so important. And I love that was the intentionality behind that you all put into place. So thank you. And I think at this time we're gonna wrap up in the last couple of minutes. Maria, I'm going to turn it back to you.
Great. Thanks, Kimberly. So as we often do, we had big ideas that we were going to have all this time for questions and talking through Zeta's next steps and what they plan to do with the continued data that will roll in. But we'll have to put that on the back burner because we do want to be respectful of everyone's time, and we're so grateful that you are all here. If you do have questions that were not answered and that you didn't submit, please feel free to submit them right now in either the chat or the questions section of your GoToWebinar. And we'll make sure to follow up with you directly with whoever is best appropriate for that answer. And we also, while we have you, do want to make a quick announcement that we will be refreshing our GreekLifeEdu course, possibly to be renamed also. So we're really excited to be updating a lot of this content. Kimberly is, of course, spearheading this incredible project. So it will be fantastic. And we have a couple other really incredible subject matter experts that will be contributing to that as well. We will be updating our hazing information, updating our sexual assault and substance misuse prevention education. We'll also be including a small section on mental wellness and well-being, and really make sure we're diving into community culture. So we're excited for you all to see that. But thank you again so much for being here. And please, please, please submit your questions via chat and question. We'll look forward to answering them. And we look forward to having further conversations with you all soon. Thank you all so much. And thank you to Megan and Haley so much for participating in this with us. We're so grateful.